Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Go-to-Market Strategy in an Unpredictable Market. My name is Michelle Eisenberg, and I am a program assistant here at the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the Nasdaq Center is a nonprofit building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. So as you will see in the chat in a moment, the Nasdaq Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So definitely make sure to check out those links and resources in the chat. And then just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, let us know where you are dialing in from in the chat. We always love to connect. And second, we are going to open up for live Q&A at the end of the event. So please make sure to submit your questions for us in that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation, and we will try our best to get to all of them. And of course, none of what we do could be possible at the center without all of the amazing support from our sponsors, including Nasdaq, Lehigh University, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Wells Fargo, the Nareet Foundation, Walmart.org, JP Morgan Chase, BPM, HubSpot for Startups, and Google Cloud. We are humbled by their contributions and hope you are grateful too. And so before we get started, we always like to launch just a couple polls to step back, see how everyone in the room is doing today. This first poll is going to ask, how are you feeling? Fearful, anxious, surviving, or optimistic? How are you feeling about your business? I'll give it just a few moments for folks to respond here. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. I'll give it one more moment. All right. I'm going to end this poll and share these results. Awesome. Looks like optimism is in the lead. Always great to see, but definitely have some feelings of anxiety and surviving. I'm very confident that our conversation today may help address some of those feelings. So I'm going to stop sharing this poll and launch that second poll. What is keeping you up at night? Finance, sales, marketing, scale, pivot, team, or surviving? And this one just helps us understand your current needs as an entrepreneur so we can ensure the programs and resources that are in development are meaningful for all of you. Awesome. We got folks from the DC metro area, Cape Town, North Carolina, Seattle, Victoria, British Columbia, Cleveland, Dallas. Welcome, welcome, Whidbey Island, Washington. Awesome. So great to have all of you dialing in. Wonderful. I'm going to end this poll and share these results. Welcome, welcome, New York, DMV. Awesome. All right. All right, it looks like we really got needs all across the board, but marketing definitely coming up in the lead there. Thank you all so much. Super helpful. So I'm going to stop sharing this poll, and without any further delay, please join me in giving the warmest welcome to our special guest, Erika Velasquez Alpern, founder and principal at Tactile and co-founder and chief business officer at the PERS. Erika, such a pleasure to have you here with us today. Thank you so much for joining.
Hi, I'm so excited for this. Hi, everyone in the chat.
Wonderful. Well, before we just jump right into the conversation, do you maybe want to give just like 30 seconds on who you are and what has brought you to kind of the go-to-market world?
Yeah, of course. I've spent my entire career in unpredictable markets. Topic is near and dear to my heart. So I run a marketing consultancy called Tactile. I'm also the chief business officer of a newsletter first women's media startup called The Purse. That was actually started a year ago by Lindsay Stanberry, the founding editor of Refinery 29's Money Diaries. And I have spent most of my career in media and startups. So working in-house and as a consultant for brands like Morning Brew, Trip Kit, Argent. Most recently, I was at a venture-backed startup called Newsstand for 3 years in the pandemic. So the concept of an unpredictable market is very top of mind. And I'm really excited about this conversation today because I'm coming at it from the perspective of a marketer, but also as a founder right now. So really excited to have this conversation.
Awesome. Love it. So you kind of have like perspectives from several angles. And so I think this is going to be wonderful. And I guess to jump right in, of course, we talked a little bit about this before we actually started the session, some of the things that are going through founders' minds in terms of what makes this a particularly unpredictable time for businesses. And so how do you recommend that startups can, no matter what, point in their, go to market journey they're at, whether they're kind of, really gearing up for a launch or they're still kind of in an ideation phase, how do you kind of suggest that founders begin to design or refine their strategy to adapt to potential sudden market shifts without losing that momentum?
Yeah. So I think there are a few things that are important to keep in mind. And this is for anyone, a company of any size, right? So whether you're like a super early stage stealth mode startup or a more established startup who has like a couple of fundraising rounds under your belt. I think that first thing that you really need to uncover is like, what are you trying to achieve? Who is your audience? Really getting to know them and how they're impacted by specific market changes. And the reason I say that is because I think sometimes startups actually feel like things that they should pivot their go to market because something has happened, but the thing that has happened actually doesn't impact their audience or isn't in line with like the product that they're building and actually doesn't matter that much.
Mm.
Um, and then of course you see things on the other side of the spectrum where people show up really big and their audience has been like severely impacted by some shift that has happened. And it either feels tone deaf or doesn't necessarily have the impact that they're looking for. And so I think that the way to really like assess what you need to do is to first really look at like who you're trying to reach. I often say that marketing is an exercise in empathy, and really becoming essentially obsessed with your target audience, understanding who they are, what they love, what they do, what motivates them, what issues they care about. And if you don't have the answers to that question, then actually doing the work to uncover those before you build out that go-to-market, which hopefully will then allow you to assess like how impacted your go-to-market is when you start to see these shifts.
Love that. And like we see this kind of theme across a lot of different conversations that we have related to these challenges that entrepreneurs are facing in terms of like it always goes back to understanding your audience and the people that you're looking to serve. And so many of these founders in our audience, maybe are likely in their first few years of business, maybe have a small team and limited resources. And so how might they start to prioritize this market research to inform an eventual go-to-market strategy or the go-to-market strategy that they're currently designing in order to stay ahead of those kinds of emerging trends and changing consumer behaviors?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I love the early scrappy stage for this because I think often it can feel really daunting to do that market research, right? And it's a time commitment and you feel like you need scale in order to get the insights you're looking for. And so I think that what I find to be a helpful reminder is to focus on depth over breadth when it comes to really understanding your audience and to never underestimate the power of a conversation with five people. And sometimes actually having a 30-minute conversation with five people is more impactful than having 5,000 people fill out a survey. And so I think that it's still a time commitment, right? If we're talking about a few hours, finding those people, ensuring that they have the time to sit with you and have a conversation. But especially for early stage companies, I always recommend just trying to map out who your ICE EP is and then having a conversation with just a few folks that fit that profile. I think the other thing that is related to that, especially when you're dealing with limited resources, a limited budget, while also having very ambitious goals and vision for what you want your launch to look like, um, is also reminding yourself that like there's a difference between what I sometimes say is like ideal state versus like realistic state. And often I think companies will look at what they would think is like ideal state. Like I need to do this and I need to do this. And there's a specific playbook I'm supposed to follow. And I think it's okay to, once you've done that work, to really understand where your audience is, what they care about, to actually just focus on a couple of core places that you can show up really well, that are also realistic to just how you naturally want to show up, what you're best at as a solo, if you're a solo founder, especially. And so it's okay to focus on like reality state versus ideal state.
Hmm. Absolutely. Love this idea of like not spreading yourself too thin and like really focusing on like those key relationships and activities that are driving impact and growth. It's I think especially for these entrepreneurs that, have to kind of feel like they're picking and choosing what to prioritize and what to give their time to. That's such an important reminder of like, really identifying those key elements to your business to really lean into. So that's awesome. And you mentioned something in terms of, you know, just always keeping, these your in like what you're learning about these your whether it's your target audience or stakeholders, whatever it may be, continuing to learn. And so with, the kinds of technology and consumer expectations that are constantly evolving. Especially today, we have like a lot of AI and other kinds of emerging technology that, could, either be leveraged in order to enhance this kind of user research that entrepreneurs are doing, and also just, better understand those expectations. And so I apologize. And so what core elements are there, or maybe there's a better way to ask this. Are there core elements of a go-to-market strategy that should remain consistent, regardless of, these kinds of key factors that you are key insights that you're drawing from your target audience? Or is the go-to-market strategy really something that's entirely flexible depending on like the unique business?
Yeah, I like both are true, right? So I think one thing that is a caution that I think is important to note is that you could spin yourself in circles if you listen to everyone constantly, and you would, because the reality is that you will get like conflicting ideas, feedback, etc. And so there is an aspect of like gut and intuition that I think founders have that is important to listen to, and to stay the course. I think though, before developing a go-to-market, it is important to like go really deep on your audience so that you then can stick to some like core tenets of that go-to-market. I
Mm.
think where startups sometimes run into challenges is when they haven't done that like first step before designing their channel strategy, their approach, where they're going to show up, what their resourcing looks like, and therefore are in like this state of constant iteration as they're starting to collect feedback once they're out already. Um, so I think that when you take that first step, then you can kind of stay true to like these core tenets. I think the other piece of it going to like, unpredictability and like external factors that you cannot control, is also understanding again, like how much your business is impacted. So I'll give an example. I mean, I feel like there are so many within different categories, but one example is I was working years ago with oh, and I see a question came in too. So I will look at that in a second. But so I was working with a startup that was in the women's health space, and they were planning, and they were a little bit later stage, and they were planning this like really big moment. And as we know, women's health has been in the news quite a bit, and there are a lot of like larger decisions that have changed. And so for them, they actually had to really shift how they were showing up because it not only impacted their target audience, but it had a direct impact on the product that they were building. And so for them, they actually just had to speed up their timeline. So instead of
Yeah.
pausing, it was actually like, okay, we need to accept that we are going to have to go bigger than we thought we were going to. And we are going to have to show up much sooner than we were ready to. But for them, there was significant upside in doing that. And
Yeah.
so I think that that was really important. On the flip side, I was working with another company where the founder felt very passionate about this specific topic, but the product that they were creating had nothing to do with that like larger conversation. And so for them, they actually didn't shift anything within their go-to-market because it actually didn't have an impact at all. And so I think that that's the other piece too, is how do you separate like founder like experience, feelings personally from again like the impact that on the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is a big question for entrepreneurs is like, how do I know whether this external situation is going to impact my business? And I wonder if there are maybe, from your experience, any kind of critical early warning signs or signals that would indicate that your go-to-market strategy is going to be impacted, and what needs to be adjusted at that time now that there's something that's external that you can't control that's impacting that go-to-market strategy.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that, and the other piece of it is that sometimes you just don't know, right? And so I think that sometimes it's about creating a go-to-market with flexibility. The good news is that especially as an early stage business, your go-to-market is usually quite flexible, right? It's a bit different when you are a much larger business who's making like multi-million dollar media buys or like purchased a Super Bowl commercial, right? Where you pulling that commercial is challenging. It's on the calendar, it's planned significantly in advance. I
Yeah.
think the like benefit of being an earlier stage startup is that you're prioritizing channels that are more flexible. You can pull the plug on something, you can slow something down, you can speed something up. And so I think that like even as you scale and you grow, trying to keep some of that so that you maintain that flexibility is really helpful. Um, I think the other piece is just essentially a cost benefit analysis of what is the absolute worst case scenario if we stay the course, and what is the absolute worst case scenario if we don't? What is the best case scenario if we stay the course, and what's the best case scenario if we pull the plug on this? And I think that really doing that work and assessing everything will sometimes just help you make the decision. And sometimes you just accept the risk as well, right? Where
Mhm.
you understand that, hey, this might be received from some people within our core audience in a challenged way, or it may not reach people in the way we were hoping. However, there's actually a like significant challenge if we don't do it, and therefore we're just going to incur this risk. So sometimes it's also just like a risk assessment.
Yeah, oh, that's such a good point that what you bring up. And I know that risk can be a scary subject for entrepreneurs, especially some of these first time founders. But there's really important conversation to have in that respect of, what is really going to be worth your time, team, resources, all of that. And really sitting down and understanding what the priorities for you and your business look like. And I think that will lead you absolutely to that, correct direction that's right for your particular business in that situation. Um, and so, when entrepreneurs are kind of in this, it you know, dealing with an unpredictable market landscape, like we are, right now, trying to, figure out how this is going to impact their business. Um, I think there can be, a question of like how to strike a balance between like long-term strategic planning and the agility needed to make some of these, like minor rapid adjustments based on, user insight. And so I love that you kind of like emphasize this idea of like, oh, like, really maintain that flexibility in your go-to-market strategy. And so where do you kind of see that line being drawn between long-term strategic planning, and these kinds of responses to the market environment?
Yeah. So I think there's a difference between like always on marketing, audience building, community driving, or lead gen versus like a big launch, a big moment, a go to market. And I think that sometimes number one, like the go to market is sometimes like more fun and sexier, and people like put all of their eggs in that basket and actually forget about like that steady drumbeat of conversation you want to have with your audience. Either before or after or throughout the entire process. And I
Yeah.
bring that up because what I have found with certain startups is when we focus on ensuring that we have that steady drumbeat of marketing conversations with our core audience, it creates that flexibility because it means like we can actually delay a launch and it's not like we're suddenly doing nothing. We're just focused on that day-to-day conversation. So I'll give an example. I was working with a startup that was in the workplace experience space. And as you can imagine, in the pandemic, with conversations around return to office and spikes and dips and things like that, our go-to-market was very unpredictable. The timeline was constantly changing. And so what we found was that the best way for us to mitigate some of that risk was to actually focus our efforts on content that was really speaking to folks like providing value and conversation in the day to day so that we had flexibility on our timeline. We
Yeah.
then went into market, got some feedback from customers that there were aspects of our product that weren't yet developed that people were super interested in. And so then we actually pulled the plug again on our like big launch and slowed things down so that we could focus on product development, but we still didn't lose that baseline conversation that we were having from like a content and event standpoint. And so I think that the more you can do stuff like that, the better.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think especially like for founders who may have like small teams, that's like super critical. And just kind of going off of that, I know that like when it comes to go-to-market strategy, a lot of founders are still kind of trying to identify like where are they most needed, and what is the role that is kind of most well aligned for what they can bring to the table as part of that business. And so for founders with a team, how do you kind of suggest that you know founders who are in that leadership position really create kind of like a trickle down effect to their team, and maybe like the other company leadership, if there's a co-founder or what have you, when that situation arises that your business needs to make quick decisions based on market unpredictability, or in certain cases even pivot to some degree. How do you kind of suggest that entrepreneurs really integrate that communication with throughout their team to ensure success?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that especially for an early stage startup, I think early stage startups should assume that everyone on leadership is part of the go-to-market strategy and team. And I think that it's super important because, especially if you're early stage, you're still assessing product market fit potentially. If you are a B2B business, like the relationship between sales and marketing and product is so mission critical. And
Mhm.
so everyone should really be bought in. That doesn't mean that there is no decision maker. I also think it's really important to have someone who is in charge of making the call. But I think that having everyone be a part of that go to market and bought in is super important. And also will ensure that, especially again, like that product marketing sales relationship within a B2B business is super important. So I think that's one piece. Obviously, if you're like a team of one, solo founder who has not yet hired, it makes things easy in that regard. The challenge is that when you're a solo founder or a team of two, then you're like, how do I keep up with all of this marketing that you're telling me I'm supposed to do? And so then I think it becomes more of a game in prioritization. So going back to that, like really understanding your audience and knowing that you actually don't need to be everywhere that your audience is. You just need to be in one place that they are consistently and show up in the right way. I'll give an example. I have a client who came to me and she was like, "Oh man, I'm like really struggling to post on TikTok like every day." And I was like, "But why are you posting on TikTok every day?" And she was like, "Oh, because this other like startup friend of mine, makes bags and like sold out in like a day on TikTok." And I was like, "Okay, great. Do you want to make TikToks?" And she was like, "No." And I was like, "Great. So that's not our strategy anymore."
Yeah.
And what we realized was that specifically the audience she was targeting and also the scale she was looking for responded really well to just like in-person events. And she loves those types of experiences. And so that became her strategy. And it doesn't mean that people coming to these like frequent events that she's doing aren't on TikTok. It just meant that that strategy was right for her as like in terms of what she wanted to spend her time on and also a way to focus.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I know. I think that's such a excuse me, such a good example because I know so many entrepreneurs are, are still kind of trying to identify what those key channels are. And we hear so much of that is like, oh God, I have to be on social media because I have to. And it's like, maybe or maybe not. But really, and I love this idea of, really going where your heart kind of, it can like naturally connects to. Because, I know that so many entrepreneurs here are in it for, the heart of what they're doing. And, you know, that really is where your authenticity and your confidence is going to shine is in those spaces, where feel like you can thrive and like you can really, drive that impact. And so I love that you mentioned that. So wonderful. And then you also, I know we've talked quite a bit about, this kind of idea of, always going back to the user insight. And so what are your thoughts on kind of, integrating continuous feedback loops, in not only into your go-to-market strategy, but right now something that entrepreneurs can kind of implement into their business, to prepare, so that once these kind of market disruptions do eventually happen, they kind of already have, that feedback coming through from their audience that they need to make strong decisions.
Yeah, it's a great question because I think often it's easier to do it in the beginning and then you stop or it gets deprioritized, right? Because like we're all moving a million miles per hour and we're all focused on growth. And sometimes it feels like a conversation with your customer isn't propelling growth forward, and isn't going to be deprioritized over a sales meeting or an investment in like performance marketing or what have you. So I think that the earlier you can create like a structure for yourself and a commitment to that consistent engagement, the better. So I have worked with companies who had like a 1 a week rule where they were like, okay, someone in the company will have one conversation with one person in our audience or one customer on a weekly basis.
Mhm.
And it didn't always have to be the same person, but it was just like a rule of thumb. You have a sign, like I've worked with people who had sign up sheets. So that's like one way of going about it. Another way is, okay, on a monthly basis, we're going to do like an AMA with our audience as a way to do listening. Um, I also think it's important to note that sometimes you can use a like a two birds, one stone approach and think about opportunities to turn these conversations into marketing, right? So we've done things like that at previous startups I've worked in-house for, where we were like, okay, we're going to do a webinar series, which is like critical to our lead gen, really fun to do, and use it also as like a customer listening opportunity. And
Mhm.
so I think that when there are opportunities to build those together, I've worked with retail brands who are like, okay, we're going to host in-store events because those are really helpful to get people in the store, but we're also going to use it as an opportunity to actually have conversations with our customer. So I think that's also a way to go about it so that you're also just utilizing the resources in the best way.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this idea of like really ensuring that you're maximizing the potential of these opportunities. And, it doesn't have to just be like one lane. You can really accomplish, all both sides of that coin. And so really love that example. And, I think, a lot of entrepreneurs, um, you know, are in markets, where sometimes like the timing is everything. And, I know there's a lot of entrepreneurs that are kind of working, on a seasonal basis. Or, that timing of the launch is just really critical. And so when entrepreneurs are kind of gathering this feedback, what are some of the signals that might indicate that, they're not launching too early or too late, that they're really kind of being timely with delivering, this solution to that target audience?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there are a couple of things, right? One, so in terms of assessing if you're too early, I think one of the biggest questions is will you if you are successful, will you be able to meet the demand? And I would say within reason, right? I think that the sometimes the best problem to have is like too much demand to meet. But like, do you have a plan if you cannot meet the demand? Or will you actually lose those folks? So I'll give an example. I was working with a startup who felt like the sales cycle was going to be quite long, and so moved their launch up before the product was really ready. And there was pretty significant demand for the product that the company then couldn't meet. And then those leads actually ultimately became stale because they lost interest in the product by the time the product was ready. Right. And so you don't want to fall into that because it's not that you can't then do the same thing again. It just means that you've sort of wasted effort. So I think first it's assessing like, okay, do we have a way to meet the demand if we see that demand? And if we don't, do we have a way to at least invest in nurturing people while we continue to build the product?
Mhm.
I think on the like flip side, when it's like, is it time to move things up? Is there a moment in time that could propel your business forward that was unexpected? And I think that sometimes it's worth moving things up, accepting that things aren't going to be as perfect as you envisioned, or also getting creative and saying, okay, is there a way that we can take like more of a wait list approach to this launch than we were initially planning for? Is there a way that we can do like a beta launch, even if we weren't planning to do that? So seeing what mechanisms you have to move things up to take advantage of like a cultural moment that might be significant for your brand.
Yeah, yeah, I think those are such great ideas, and it's a lot for entrepreneurs to think about in terms of what will work for them, as I know many are gearing up for a launch and kind of trying to identify that perfect timing. And so yeah, no, I think it's really great in terms of emphasizing like, really capitalizing on some of these moments. And, like I always think of like Zoom during the pandemic, really capitalizing on that moment. And there are obviously other businesses as well that ended up thriving during that tumultuous time. And so that timing really is key. And I think asking yourself those kinds of questions can really help you mitigate those risks potentially. So that's wonderful. Wonderful. Awesome. I think we have time for a few more questions before Q&A. So, I think something that a lot of entrepreneurs worry about, especially for those who, have maybe experienced this before, when their go-to-market efforts are disrupted by unforeseen challenges. Whether, the first thing that comes to mind is like a distribution challenge, something of that sort, where, that then impacts the customer directly. Like, what is your suggestion in terms of kind of managing your marketing and sales efforts during, your kind of communication strategy during these tumultuous times where customers may not, have all of the information that you do?
Yeah. So I think it always comes back to like, how do you super serve your audience, right? And part of that is like an over communication, sometimes a level of transparency, admitting fault when there is fault. And I think that especially for startups, people tend to respond really well to that. And so I think that it's almost like the same way that you like hopefully treat your employees, which is like having a conversation. It like being as transparent as you can, telling them what's going on, providing updates. I think that there are certain things that are outside of your control, and people are actually more understanding than you would realize when they feel like they are being spoken to, and they feel like there's a level of respect. So I think that the more you can lean into those things, the better. And again, you're always going to have someone that's angry. We cannot, like, it is impossible to make everyone happy. And so that's okay too, right? Like, I think that it's okay to say, okay, a couple of people are really frustrated with what has happened. We will try to do better next time. We will try to communicate as much as we can. We are doing our best, and like, that is okay.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, really comes down to like kind of that authenticity and like that human touch. So I really love, just really, less pitching and more kind of just like authentic conversation. And I think that like really does resonate with so many folks these days. And so I think that's really such a poignant idea. Um
We're all just looking for like human connection, especially coming out of a global pandemic when we were all on Zoom for so long. I think that people just want to feel like they're talking to other people, even if they're interacting with a brand, even if you're a B2B business, it is about that like human to human connection and conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So true. And we do hear that from entrepreneurs like across industries. And so, whether it's health or, even beauty, fitness, retail, all across industries where we hear that kind of the difference that authenticity and human touch makes in those small interactions. So wonderful. And then, one thing that we haven't quite touched on, but I wanted to make sure we touched on, and just I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you kind of view the role of competitive analysis and what entrepreneurs have to learn from their competitors, specifically to set themselves up for greater success and growth during, market uncertainty.
Yeah, it's such a good question. So first off, I think the an important point is the acknowledgement that everyone has a competitor, even when they think they don't. So I will be honest, I talk to a lot of founders sometimes who are like, oh, we don't have competitors. No one is doing what we're doing. But the reality is that everyone has a competitor. Even if you have a different solution to a problem, you are still competing for attention. You are still competing for for the offering of a different solution to solve a specific problem. And so I think that first, it's if you're in the camp of, okay, we are the first, a first of its kind product, and we don't have a one-to-one competitor, that's okay, but still important to understand like how you are competing for attention and who that competitive set is. So I think that's the first piece. The second is once you have that like competitive set, really understanding like what is differentiating to you and why are people coming to you over someone else? What are the like core differentiators from a product standpoint, but also just from like a brand standpoint. Why is someone going to connect with your brand? What are you offering that this other competitor isn't? And then I think paying attention to like where are they showing up? Usually when people are showing up in certain places, frequently it is because it is working for them. And so I do think it's worth at least just having that in mind. And then understanding that you don't have to do the same thing that they're doing. So if you know who your audience is, you know how like what your differentiators are. I still think that, and you're aware of the specific channels they're using. I still think it's about like focusing on like where you can show up uniquely, where you can super serve your own community. And where you feel like you can ultimately win.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. So many great points there. And I know a lot of entrepreneurs are kind of in the process of conducting those types of competitive analyses. So really helpful to just kind of have those in your head of like, okay, these are like the key points that I need to understand about my competitors. And to help inform that strategy is so key to ensure that you are differentiated and really, I think alongside that, identifying your value proposition, in relation to those competitors. And so, all such good points.
And one thing I also think is important is knowing who your friends are within the space. So I think there is the competitive analysis piece that's really important, but then also who are your partners and where are they showing up and how are they showing up? And I think often there's a lot of inspiration to take from people who are serving the same audience and customer, but providing something that is non-competitive and how you can partner with those folks and learn from those folks as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. Well, I think we are at that time for live Q&A. So if you are in the audience and you have a question, please make sure to drop it in that Q&A function and we'll try to get to as many as possible. So let's see. We have one entrepreneur here, we've talked a lot about, gathering feedback from customers and your target audience. Something that we hear from a lot of folks is, our focus groups, what is the impact of focus groups in particular, and how would one even like go about putting together a focus group? I guess, my question to you would be, how, what are your thoughts on, identifying whether a focus group is kind of the right way in which to gather that feedback?
Yeah. So I think that a couple of things. Sometimes it's better to have like a one-on-one conversation than to organize a specific focus group where people are feeding off of each other. Though I do think if you're taking the like, utilize the resource to also provide marketing, sometimes like a little mini event is helpful. Um, I'll answer this assuming like a level of scrappiness and say that never underestimate the power of like phoning a friend. Meaning you would be surprised at how helpful your own network can be in finding a few people to have a conversation with. So whether that is posting something on LinkedIn and saying like, hey, I'm looking to talk to people who are X, Y, and Z and seeing who responds, sending an email out to people within your own network and asking if they fit that specific profile and keeping it like small on purpose to start and seeing if you're getting the value that you need. If you have more resources, there are also like consultants that will do these things for you. There are ways to work with a third party to conduct more like in-depth research. And sometimes that's the right choice to work with like a go-to-market agency or a market research agency. But there is a lot that you can do by just tapping your network and your community.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's such a great point, and really goes back to what you were kind of talking about just now of like, really leveraging those partnerships and connections and in terms of understanding and setting the foundation for success for that launch. And so super important. Thank you. And we have another question here. Um, I think this person is, probably early, very early in their business journey. Maybe they have, don't have necessarily a lot of data to go off, like personal data that they've collected to go off. So, what are your thoughts on, other ways that entrepreneurs can kind of endorse the work that they're doing until they are able to like gather significant customer feedback?
Yeah, I think that definitely leaning into like your own, whether that's like a previous employer, previous coworkers, etc. I can even give my own example. When I launched Tactile like 8 years ago, I was very early stage. I feel like I had nothing. I had a website, I had a .com that I built myself in like an evening. And I leaned so heavily on my like former colleagues to help me get the business going. And so that was a combination of really just hearing their feedback. And I was like, I'm thinking of doing this thing, and this is the offering, and this is the type of customer I'm going after. And the I will say that people that like working with you will assume that you're going to be successful. And usually, like the first round of feedback is just positivity and support. And so, like, digging a bit deeper is important, right? Because the reality also is that starting a company is really different than being an employee. But I found that, like, that second layer, once you like peel back their amazing support and really getting to the heart of like their own feedback is helpful. And I think that they can be extremely supportive from an external standpoint as well, whether that's something as small as dropping, a comment on a LinkedIn post that you do, providing a LinkedIn endorsement, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Love it. Wonderful. Awesome. We have another question here. And I think this is so relevant. We hear this so often, especially with entrepreneurs in like the finance or like health industries. How do you kind of ensure that your go-to-market strategy is successful when it's difficult to get information from your customers? Um, how can entrepreneurs kind of from the beginning, when they may not necessarily have like established credibility or built that trust, what are your suggestions for kind of like nurturing those conversations that can be, difficult with certain industries, whether it's like finance, health, legal, there can be really difficult kind of nuances there.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that it goes back to that like consistent conversation, which is sometimes a really nice way to show up to start to like learn as you go, build the plane while you fly it, which I think is just the reality for a lot of startups. And so I think that sometimes building out a go-to-market that is less about one moment and more about a series of moments can be really helpful in starting to create that feedback loop and also just learn, right? So it feels a little less daunting when you're like, okay, we're going to start like a newsletter strategy, which is an investment, right? But it is forest or the tree is more about the like conversation and the audience that you build over the course of a few months, as opposed to like the first thing that you send out to someone, right? And so that creates that way of like learning, iterating pretty quickly. So I think that when you don't have that customer feedback or information, that is a way to start to create that like feedback loop for yourself. Uh, I think the other piece is going back to just thinking about people who are adjacent to the product that you provide and how can you have conversations with people within your industry. So as an example, I mentioned The Purse. We are a newsletter first women's media startup. We are constantly in conversation with our audience, which we're very lucky to have that feedback loop. But we also spend a lot of time talking to other similarly sized media businesses, or even media businesses that are further along to understand what's working. Those folks are not competitive to us. They're maybe within different topic areas, but we share pretty significant overlap in audience and have found that like those conversations are extremely informative. So I think that that can also be really helpful.
I love that. That's awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Wonderful. Awesome. If you're in the audience and you have a question for Erica, make sure to drop it in that Q&A box. We have another question here. Of course, um, AI is there's a lot of new technology coming out. I guess my question to you would be, um, what are your thoughts, on kind of like finding a balance, in terms of, I know a lot of entrepreneurs, especially like who are early stage, who may be solopreneurs, will lean on, automation or, some of this emerging technology to support. And so just, I guess, any thoughts on, just best practices around, from your experience, leveraging these technologies in support of, gathering customer insight or competitive insight, or just, designing that resilient go-to-market strategy.
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think that it is like AI is an extremely helpful tool in anything research driven, right? And I think that it is also extremely helpful to have that tool when you are resource constrained. So I think that it is, especially if you're thinking about like, okay, competitive analysis and keeping up with the needs there. I think that utilizing like a chat GPT for, and like have ensuring that you're a wonderful prompt engineer creating those prompts, because you can go in a different direction accidentally sometimes. But I think that it's a really useful tool. For that, I think similarly, then once you have that competitive set, having it like using those tools to analyze that can also be helpful. That said, it's not 100% of the work, right? And I think that even if it's like an 80-20, where 80% of the day-to-day work in competitive, like a competitive audit is done through AI, you still do want to have that due diligence on your end, where you are also doing the research, having the conversations, posting, seeing what people are commenting. Because I think that number one, it just ensures that you're super close to the customer and close to the product. And I think that's really critical. And it's a good like process to create for yourself. But also, I think that sometimes when you lean too heavily on AI, like 100% for that stuff, you do end up missing some things. So I think that it's just having a process for yourself and a framework that allows you to utilize both.
100%. Absolutely. And kind of goes back to finding that balance there, and just something we talked about earlier of like really ensuring that human touch, and that's not going to necessarily come through those AI tools. So really important note to emphasize. Awesome. I think this is an interesting question. This person is kind of thinking about, utilizing um free offerings in order to kind of drive go-to-market, success. And so, for those, what are your suggestions on kind of just, launching, potentially a free option in tandem with, that paid offering, and how entrepreneurs may kind of, funnel customers in, despite a potentially tumultuous market landscape.
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think that it can be extremely helpful. However, sometimes you'll get like a false sense of product market fit if ultimately the ambition is a paid product, and people are eating up the free community, but then don't convert. And so I think that that can be challenging. And I think that there are a couple of things at play. One is like, what is the paid product and where does it sit from a pricing standpoint? If it is not like a significant leap from like free to paid offering, then I think that it can work, right? If we're talking about a, free community and then you can upgrade to like a $10 a month subscription, it might be, I think it's worth it. When you're talking about like a significant investment from the customer, though, I think that sometimes launching both in tandem is important, and then making sure that you are really surveying that community, that free community, to understand the relationship between the two. Because like you may also find that there's, again, completely different customer types for like the paid offering and the free offering, and it may be like a funnel that never works if
Ah,
they're separate.
Yeah, really, such important points that you bring up there, and I think that's really important to recognize is it may how the implementation of a free offering can potentially impact that paid offering that you're trying to push. So really, really great, awesome, and I think just to close us out. Would love to hear your thoughts on, we had a couple entrepreneurs that were kind of asking about, contingency planning, especially, with some of the upcoming challenges that we may see, with the election and the new year, and just the continued changes with work, the work lifestyle that people are kind of that industries are shifting to. And so how might what are kind of, I guess, the key elements to a contingency plan that entrepreneurs should implement as it pertains to their go-to-market strategy?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think that sometimes just like a healthy dose of neuroses is like really helpful. And just assume that like assume chaos, assume the worst, assume that everything will go wrong. And then that way you have a what if plan for everything, but then don't let that prevent you from moving forward. And I think that is sometimes just writing on paper, like, okay, if this happens, we're going to pivot in this way. If this happens, we're going to hold off for 2 weeks, right? Like sometimes it's a matter of just delaying a launch a week, and that's okay. And that actually is like not significant. Um, and so just putting that on paper so that you feel prepared for something that you can't actually prepare for can be really helpful.
Yeah, love it. Erica, this has been so wonderful. If you had just one
Fun.
key takeaway or piece of wisdom, what would that be?
I'm like, it will be okay, everyone. It's just, I think that, companies of all sizes and all stages are thinking about this. And I think that often as a founder, number one, it can feel really lonely and you can feel like this, like nothing is predictable and you feel like that push pull or you're on a hamster wheel that never goes anywhere. And all of these things are so common for startups of any stage and size. And so I think that just like remembering that is important.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining. It's been so wonderful. And on behalf of the Nasdaq Center, we're just so grateful you joined us.
Thank you. This was really fun. It was nice to meet all of you in the chat.
Wonderful. And to our audience, thank you so much for joining. We'd love you all to join us for some upcoming webinars, which you can view using those links that are going to be posted in the chat. And we look forward to welcoming you back online with us soon.